Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, August 10th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 23 days, the game against Michigan in 107 days, and oh boy, did we get some news. On Wednesday morning at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, Ohio State Athletic Director Gene Smith announced that he would be retiring on June 30th, 2024. So you got another whole year, Gene Smith. That's the head of Ohio State's athletic department, but that's going to be a major change coming next summer. We talked a whole bunch about that on a very special live episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast, so you can hear our thoughts on all that stuff. Check out the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed on your podcast platform of choice, or just find us on youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. But Tony Gerdeman and I talked about that, and Tony Gerdeman and I are going to be talking about a bunch of other stuff we learned when we talked to Ryan Day on Wednesday morning at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. And I guess let's start with the kind of most immediate news, and that is the status of second-year defensive end Amari Abor. He posted a picture from a hospital bed on his Instagram story, and everyone kind of went, I wonder what that means. And Ryan Day never wants to get too in-depth on injuries, but we did at least kind of get an update on where things stand with him.
Yeah, I was surprised that Ryan was like, I don't do Instagram, so I don't know what you're talking about, but did say that he'll be out for a couple months. Didn't want to get into why, or other than it is an injury of some sort. Can't hide that fact because the picture came from the hospital bed, but it'll be a couple months at least at this point. And the guy who redshirted last year, so really at this point, you'd like to see him on the field if possible, but even still, probably running fifth among the defensive ends behind JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry. Those are pretty clearly your top four at this point. Mitchell Melton, obviously, getting in there as well with the defensive ends right now. Will eventually play some Jack, so they've got a five that they like. So if you're going to lose somebody for a while, you'd like them to be towards the back of the depth chart at this point, but it's unfortunate because, again, he redshirted last year, played in maybe a couple of games, and now is going to be out for a while.
Yeah, and these are important reps, game reps that you could be picking up, because you're going to have a lot of opportunities for fifth and sixth guys on the depth chart to pick up game reps when you're playing Youngstown State and teams like that. It gets a little harder later in the year. Indiana, if you're looking at a Big Ten East team that they might be able to work their way down the depth chart, might be Indiana. So you're missing a lot of opportunities there. So, the good news is it doesn't sound like it's necessarily an all year kind of thing, but never good to lose a player like that. Also never good, Tony, when the first question is about how are things at right tackle, and then the answer is like, well, that's sort of a complicated question. It's all framed sort of as like, they're doing okay and they're, giving the quarterbacks enough time. But it also feels like, boy, we are in week 2 of fall camp, and it sure sounds like there are some significant questions at the tackle position.
Well, when we last left here at the practice field last week, Josh Fryer was at left tackle, which is where he was in the spring. That's where we always saw him. And so then when Ryan Day was asked about right tackle, the first thing he said, well, Josh Fryer, and he's like, what?
This guy doesn't know his left from his right.
He's a left tackle. So yes, and so then he mentioned that they're playing both positions, both left tackle and right tackle. They're going back and forth. And the first 4 names he mentioned were Josh Fryer, Tegra Shabola, Jimmy Simmons, and Luke Montgomery, true freshman. And then he also mentioned and Zen Michalski as well. But it sure seemed like there's a top 4, and they're looking for the best left tackle, the best right tackle, and the fact that maybe there's some question that is Josh Fryer the best left tackle? Is that the question, or is the question maybe, well, Josh Fryer is the best right tackle, now you have to find the best left tackle? So a lot of that has to be figured out, and scrimmage is Saturday. That's going to tell them a lot. Ryan Day said this is going to be a pretty formative week in terms of thought processes and things like that. But a bit of a surprise because you figured that of the jobs that are not secure yet, left tackle wasn't necessarily one of those, but by default it may be.
Right, and you went all through spring and kind of went, well, they've had Josh Fryer running with the ones at left tackle the whole spring, and if they really had a concern, you would have assumed, spring is the time to experiment and move guys around a little bit. The fact that they didn't do that kind of led you to believe, okay, they're feeling pretty good about Josh Fryer at left tackle. So now, for him to be maybe moving to right tackle, it raises some questions. And sort of, I don't know, it's not really a cat and mouse game, but the interplay between reporters and Ryan Day,
subterfuge,
where we're trying to get information out of him, and it's like, would you give us the depth chart in verbal form right now? That would be super helpful, thanks. And then the answer is no. But then you sort of are trying to, you get something and then you're trying to discern, what does this really mean? So when one of the follow-up questions was, so if you've got Josh Fryer at right tackle, does that mean you're feeling really encouraged about one of the young guys who maybe wasn't ready in the spring, like Luke Montgomery? Might he be the answer at left tackle? And then immediately Ryan Day's answer was about Jimmy Simmons, which we've gotten a bunch of conflicting information about whether that's an internal nickname or a nickname that he prefers. So we're just going to call him Jimmy Josh. Jimmy Josh. Could open a sandwich place, sort of like a McDowell's hamburgers, like a Jimmy Josh sandwich place. We'll get to the NIL opportunities later. Let's talk about the on-field opportunities. He immediately mentioned Simmons when the question was brought up about left tackle. So Simmons was not here in the spring. So is this good news where, they found their left tackle and his last name is Simmons? Yeah.
Well, what is the change? What is the new ingredient to the offensive tackle room? And it's Simmons. So now back in the spring, after spring, we talked to Justin Fry. He said that they will try Simmons out at both left tackle and right tackle. And maybe this is part of that. Clearly, this is some part of that. Mm-hmm. But maybe what they have discovered, what they found is, let's continue to see what we've got at left tackle with Simmons. I think they have a really good idea of what they have with Josh Fryer at right tackle, but still, you're obviously going to let him work and get work. The other interesting aspect in this is Luke Montgomery, who Ryan Day was effusive in his praise of a week ago, continuing to impress. And to me, coming out of that interview, it sure seemed like that was a top 4. And yet, when we were on the practice field a week ago, it was Zen Michalski as the number 1 right tackle. But that was also Josh Simmons' first practice. And he was running with the 3s at that point, just because. You work him in slowly. I am very interested to see what this looks like on Friday when we are back. And how many changes are there over the course of practice? Will anybody play both positions throughout the course of that, or is it just, okay, you're here today, tomorrow you're going to be wherever, and maybe Saturday they wait to move guys around. But, he did not seem concerned. Now, offensive line has been the concern for the entirety of it, so maybe this is just how he deals with the concern at this point, because it hasn't changed. It is what it is. You start to make friends with it. But he did say that the offensive line is giving the quarterbacks enough time to find a starting quarterback. I think that's a plus. But you, Tom, have a different take.
Yeah. Now, does that get concerned about the pass rush? And I'm 98% kidding when I say that. It does. Yeah, this is going to be super interesting to see, because we will get a chance to watch practice on Friday. That is BTN day at Ohio State, so you will be able to watch along to whatever degree BTN wants to show you on Friday. And then the scrimmage in here on Saturday, or at least out on the field. Somewhere here at the Woody. There's a concert this weekend at the stadium, so they can't do the scrimmage at the stadium. But so Josh Simmons potentially changing things at the tackle spot as a guy who came in and transferred in this year. Another guy who came in and transferred this year who could be maybe changing things on the depth chart as well is Victor Cutler. He transferred in from Louisiana Monroe. He was here this spring. Never really seemed like he was in any real danger of running a starting spot this spring, but it sounds like he's now kind of made a little bit of a push and made a run at Carson Hinsman for that starting job.
Yeah. The question was kind of phrased in a way. So Carson, are you confident with him? Has he taken that job yet? And Ryan Day is like, hold on, my friend. There's a guy named Victor Cutler. Vic Cutler has really begun to push for that job, and when asked why, he said he's changed his body. He realized kind of what it takes to do this at Ohio State, and of course it's been a full off season for him. He got here in the winter, went through the spring. Like you said, it was a very much a learning process for him, and you could tell just in the few practices that we got. So it's good to see him progress and get to this point where he's pushing, because not only does that mean you might have a better starting center, assuming he is better, but you've got another quality person. adds depth, adds quality. The competition will make that starter, whoever it is, better. So I was a little surprised. I think that's very good to hear. I don't think it should be a concern that. It's a concern that you don't have a starting center yet. But the positive is that you've got another guy vying for that, because we thought maybe Jacob James would battle Carson Hinsman. It sounds like right now James is doing some things on the interior, but it's really down to those two guys at center right now.
Yeah, and it's never great to have uncertainty on your offensive line. I mean, how many times have we talked about the importance of the offensive line gelling and working together? They're not at that point yet. That's going to have to get done. They're going to have to kind of speed run that whole process once they do settle on those guys. You also want the center quarterback exchange, that whole situation. That's a concern with the center. But good news, they don't have a quarterback either. So
that's tremendous.
So it's way too soon to be worrying about that. It is, and this is, I think quarterback is a position where tackle, I think there is reason that you could view that as like, this is a concern. Quarterback, I think, go back to the beginning of, as soon as C.J. Stroud announced he was turning pro, my opinion, and I think broadly yours as well, has been they've got a couple guys who come in with, have the pedigree. This is a coaching staff that has never had trouble coaching and developing quarterbacks, so it's going to work out one way or the other. And then, of course, the question is, okay, when will they have a starter? And this is going to be a big week coming up. But it's just listening to Ryan Day talk about it, that feels like one where I think that they potentially have two good answers there, and it's just which of the good answers are you going to pick?
First, I want to go back to the analogy that this quarterbacks, don't worry, you have no quarterback. It's kind of like you leave home for vacation or whatever, and you're like, oh, I forgot to lock the doors, and somebody else is like, oh, don't worry, the house is on fire. Is that what we're talking about here? It was interesting to me that Ryan Day said it goes back and forth. Now, does that mean it goes back and forth, or does that just mean he doesn't know who the starter is yet? Because going back and forth, I would like to know, so some days it looks like it's Devin Brown, some days it looks like it's Kyle McCord, because that is a definition of back and forth. But is that how he's using it, or is he just saying, I don't know who it's going to be? They're still battling, because battling and going back and forth, I think, are two different things. But because you could have a guy that's in second the entire way. He's close, but he's always in second. If you've got one guy that they keep going, today you're number one, tomorrow you're number one, I think that is indicative of progress and more than regression, because they recruit too well and they teach too well at quarterback here for there to be, I think, regression as you're going through the process. I think I would only see the movement as progression, and I do feel like they've got two guys that can play here, and I think maybe that will be the question next week, because I don't expect a starter to be named after this. And when we talk to him next, I do want to know, do you feel like you have two starters? Do you feel like you have two guys that can go out there and win the Big Ten?
And I think we're going to learn a lot. I mean, Ryan Day said he's going to learn a lot by the end of this week when they have go through another few practices, but also that big scrimmage on Saturday. That always feels like that scrimmage is when you tend to have those decisions more or less made. Now, Ryan Day did say something interesting, which is this year's battle is a lot closer than a lot of the other ones where it was, is it going to be Dwayne Haskins? Is it going to be Justin Fields in 2019? Is it going to be C.J. Stroud in 21? This one, and this is something we've talked about all year, this feels like the first real legitimate, you kind of knew all of those years. And I think Kyle McCord is broadly perceived as the favorite this year, but I think there's a way that you could see Devin Brown winning the starting job in a way that was not true of Justin Fields versus Gunnar Hoke, or even C.J. Stroud versus Jack Miller. That was pretty clearly, you just constantly heard C.J. Stroud's ahead, C.J. Stroud's ahead, C.J. Stroud's ahead, and so this is a little bit more of a back and forth. Interestingly, a lot next week. Tuesday, we talk to the offensive line and Coach Justin Fry. So those will be real interesting interviews. We may get a little more clarity on where things stand at that point. Wednesday, we talk to Ryan Day. That is the point at which they have a starting quarterback. So if they don't have a starting quarterback by next Wednesday, this really is a lot closer than it typically is. But this is sort of the point in fall camp after that. The end of that scrimmage at the end of week 2, that's typically where they tend to have these kind of things sorted out.
Yeah, and I'm just going through my mind, I wouldn't be shocked if it was Devin Brown, but it would be the kind of surprise, oh, okay. I think if Devin Brown wins this, then that says a lot about him. 2 years in the system to go ahead and overtake a junior. Kyle McCord wins it. It's kind of like status quo in terms of this. Well, we kind of know what to expect. You throw for 3,700 yards and 37 touchdowns and 3 or 7 interceptions, and it's just a bunch of 37s and 3s and 7s in there. But the idea that Devin Brown kind of comes from behind, and that just, it's like a different trajectory at that point where, okay, let's see what happens, because this is, the starting job is going to be significant, but there's just a little added interest or oomph or something, a little twist to it if it's Devin Brown.
So we will be tracking that quarterback race, that center race, that left tackle race, the right tackle race. There was a conversation about play calling. There's going to be a lot of that stuff to talk about over the next week or so. Also, some potentially a big recruiting decision coming up this weekend. Another one coming up about a week and a half or so after that. It is going to be quite a busy week, quite a busy month. Quite a busy season.
Is that right?
In fact, at BuckeyeHuddle.com, Tony and Kevin and I covering the team, Mark and Alex covering recruiting, and Devin and Mikey and Justin and Ross covering you on X's and O's, making you a little bit of a smarter football fan. Also, really fun community. Lots of stuff to talk about this week. Oh boy, even more than we thought at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Also, make sure you are subscribed to all of our podcasts. You can find them all. Pick your podcast platform of choice, and then type in Buckeye Huddle, and you'll find them all. Kevin's Big Knee Kickoff. Tony and I do the Buckeye Weekly podcast, Skull Session podcast with Mark and Kevin. Great shows, all of them. You can find them all by just typing in Buckeye Huddle. And finally, if you are on YouTube, make sure you hit that thumbs up. We appreciate that. And make sure you're subscribed to our channel as well, because when we do these live shows, live interviews, live breaking news, instant reaction shows, you can be a part of all of those. Just make sure you're subscribed, hit that bell so you get notified, and make sure you are a part of all of the fun with us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.